From offenses that changed the NFL forever to defenses that terrorize their opponents, each of these teams left a unique mark on the game that'll never be forgotten. This is the story of every NFL franchise's greatest team of the Super Bowl era. Starting with the Dallas Cowboys. In 1992, they had the youngest roster in the NFL, and somehow the most dangerous. They finished 13-3, but that record only tells part of the story. Their defense, later called Doomsday 2, was number 1 in the league in yards allowed. They didn't have a single Pro Bowler on that side of the ball, yet they suffocated opponents.
Let the mind control the body, not the body controlling the mind. Right, Emmett? That's it.
Offensively, they had Troy Aikman at QB, Emmitt Smith at running back, and Michael Irvin at wide receiver, all powered by the Great Wall of Dallas, the league's most dominant offensive line. In the playoffs, they crushed Philadelphia 34-10, setting up a showdown with the San Francisco 49ers at Candlestick. It was labeled as a battle for control of the decade. Steve Young and Jerry Rice on one sideline, the upstart Cowboys on the other. Aikman delivered strikes under pressure. Irvin made contested catches look routine, and Emmett wore down the Niners until Dallas walked out with a 30-20 win. 2 weeks later, the Cowboys dismantled the Buffalo Bills in Super Bowl 27, 52-17. They forced a Super Bowl record 9 turnovers, and Troy Aikman walked away with MVP honors after throwing 4 touchdowns.
How about them Cowboys?
Moving all the way to the current day, and the Cowboys' rival, the Philadelphia Eagles, carved out one of the most dominant runs in NFL history. With a big thanks to a different division rival, the Giants, who opted not to re-sign Saquon Barkley.
Saquon Barkley now has a deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. It's a 3-year deal worth almost $38 million.
The Eagles started off their 2024 season with a 2-2 record before they ripped off 16 wins in their next 17 games. Saquon Barkley exploded for over 2,000 rushing yards, joining one of the NFL's rarest clubs. In fact, he had a chance to beat Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record of 2,105 yards, but he opted not to play in the final game of the season because the Eagles had already locked up a playoff spot. Defenses tried stacking the box, but with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith torching single coverage, there was no right answer. On the other side of the ball, Vic Fangio's first season as defensive coordinator turned the Eagles into a wall. Number 1 in total defense, suffocating against the run, and relentless in the pass rush, they forced 22 turnovers. In the playoffs, Green Bay fell first. Then the Rams in a snow game where Barkley dropped over 200 yards. In the NFC Championship, they hung 55 points on Washington, the most ever in a conference title game. And then came the showdown, the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, who were chasing a three-peat. The last time these two met, Philly walked away gutted. This time, it was different. The Eagles punched first and never let up, suffocating the Chiefs in the first half and never losing control. Final score, 40-22. The Eagles' dominance in 2024 echoed the kind of control the Steelers imposed in 1978. The 1970s were run by the black and gold, but no Steelers team captured the essence of that dynasty like the 1978 squad. 2 years earlier, Pittsburgh had fielded one of the most ferocious defenses in NFL history, a unit so dominant it pitched 5 shutouts and gave up less than 10 points per game. But injuries and a one-dimensional offense kept them from making history. The NFL thought it had a solution for defenses like the Steel Curtain. In 1978, new rules made it harder to mug wide receivers, easier to protect quarterbacks, and designed to finally shift power back to the offense. But despite that, this was still the Steel Curtain. Joe Green, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham, and Mel Blount made sure opponents never forgot that Pittsburgh's identity started with the defense. On the other side of the ball, Terry Bradshaw, once seen as more gambler than general, finally put it all together. He threw for nearly 3,000 yards and a league-best 28 touchdowns, earning MVP honors while unleashing deep strikes to Lynn Swann and John Stallworth. And Franco Harris kept defenses honest on the ground, giving the offense a balance it had never truly had before. The Steelers ripped through 1978 with a 14-2 record, then tore through the playoffs before meeting Dallas in Super Bowl 13. The stage was set for one of the greatest games the NFL had ever seen, and Bradshaw made it his masterpiece. 4 touchdown passes, another MVP award, and the moment he finally stepped out from under the shadow of the defense to cement his Hall of Fame legacy. Pittsburgh outlasted the Cowboys 35-3 38-31 in a Super Bowl classic, securing their 4th championship in 6 years and officially closing the book on the Steel Curtain dynasty. And unlike the dominant force that was the Steelers, the Cardinals gave us a legendary underdog story. The Cardinals were an NFL afterthought. They bounced between cities, gone decades without relevance, and had just one playoff win in the previous 60 years. But in 2008, everything changed. Ken Whisenhunt's team stumbled to a 9-7 record, but that barely tells the story. They swept their division for the first time since 1947 and hosted a playoff game for the first time in Arizona history. And with Kurt Warner at quarterback, a 37-year-old former grocery store clerk who'd already gone from obscurity to a Super Bowl champion once before, the Cardinals had a leader who knew exactly how to ride chaos into greatness. This roster was stacked with weapons. Larry Fitzgerald was entering his prime, Anquan Boldin was as tough as they came, and Steve Breaston's speed made them impossible to cover. All 3 cracked 1,000 yards, just the 5th trio in NFL history to do it. But in the playoffs, Larry Fitzgerald took his game to even another level. Against the Falcons, the Panthers, and then the Eagles in the NFC Championship, Fitzgerald turned into a one-man wrecking crew, putting up 546 yards and 7 touchdowns in just 4 games. That playoff run carried Arizona somewhere unthinkable, their first Super Bowl. And Super Bowl 43 against the Steelers unfolded like a movie script.
Here they come. He gets it away and it's picked off.
James Harrison's 100-yard interception return before halftime was a gut punch, but Warner and Fitzgerald clawed them back. With just over 2 minutes left, Fitzgerald split the Steelers' defense for a 64-yard touchdown to put them up 23-20. Arizona, the NFL's forgotten team, was on the verge of the unthinkable, but the night belonged to one more play. Santonio Holmes, toes scraping the corner of the end zone, ripped the Lombardi out of their hands. The Cardinals' dream had ended, but their run to the Super Bowl behind Fitzgerald's record-breaking postseason remains the greatest season in franchise history, and after them, another team was ready to soar. The 1998 Atlanta Falcons weren't built around flash. They were built around Jamal Anderson, pounding defenses into the ground with his bruising, dirty bird style. Around Chris Chandler, a journeyman quarterback who suddenly caught fire at the perfect time, and around a defense that thrived on takeaways, led by veterans like Jesse Tuggle and playmakers like Ray Buchanan and Eugene Robinson. And at the center of it all was second-year head coach Dan Reeves. What made Atlanta dangerous was how relentless they were. The Falcons finished the season 14-2, winning 9 straight to close the year. They finished 4th in points scored, a +20 turnover margin, and a perfect 8-0 at home inside the Georgia Dome. The postseason run only added to the legend. In the divisional round, they outlasted Steve Young, Jerry Rice, and the 49ers in a slugfest. Then came the NFC Championship, a showdown with the 15-1 Minnesota Vikings, owners of the highest-scoring offense in NFL history to that point. But after Vikings kicker Gary Anderson, who had been a perfect 35 for 35 that year,
and Anderson hasn't missed in 2 years,
missed a field goal late.
39 yards away, and it's not good.
Chris Chandler marched the Falcons downfield and tied it with less than a minute left. In overtime, Morton Anderson drilled a 38-yarder to silence the Metrodome and send Atlanta to its first Super Bowl. The team was dirt. People stepped on us and wiped their feet on the doormat. Now we feel like a bunch of Michael Jordans. You can't kill us, and we'll do whatever it takes to win. In the Super Bowl, Reeves' old team, the Denver Broncos, stood in the Falcons' way. And while John Elway and the Broncos walked away with the Lombardi, 1998 gave the Falcons franchise belief, an identity, and a reason for the city to rise behind the Dirty Birds. Meanwhile, the Ravens' terror was just beginning. The 2000 Baltimore Ravens weren't supposed to be special. No star quarterback, no high-powered offense, nothing that screamed Super Bowl contender. But what they did have was something the league hadn't seen in decades, a defense that redefined terror. Ray Lewis was everywhere, earning Defensive Player of the Year while surrounded by an arsenal of talent. Ron Woodson patrolling the secondary, Sam Adams and Tony Siragusa clogging the middle, and Peter Boulware bringing heat off the edge. Together, they forced a league-high 49 turnovers. Teams couldn't run, couldn't pass, and most weeks they could barely even score.
If we want to be the best at what we're trying to get done, we got to shut this team out.
Baltimore allowed just 165 points all season, the lowest total ever in a 16-game schedule. But it wasn't clean or easy. Midway through the season, the Ravens' offense went 5 straight games without scoring a touchdown.
almighty! Just throw the damn thing away!
And somehow they managed to win 2 of them because their defense simply refused to let games get away, grinding out ugly wins and keeping the season alive through sheer force. And by the time January came, their identity was carved in stone. Hand the ball to rookie Jamal Lewis, play for field position, and let the defense choke the life out of whoever dared to line up across from them. And that's exactly how it played out. In the playoffs, the Ravens allowed a combined 23 points in 4 games. They held Denver to 3 points, silenced Tennessee with a game-stealing pick-6 from Ray Lewis, and suffocated Oakland's top-ranked rushing attack for just 24 yards. By the time they got to Super Bowl 35, the Giants never had a chance. Baltimore's defense forced 5 turnovers along with 4 sacks as the Ravens cruised to a 34-7 demolition. Ray Lewis walked off with Super Bowl MVP, cementing himself as the heartbeat of a team that redefined defensive greatness. But just to put it into perspective how wild it was that the Ravens allowed just 165 points all year, on the offensive side of things, the 1990 Bills scored 428 points. Before 1990, the Bills were a team stuck in the middle. Respectable at times, forgettable most of the time. But that year, everything clicked, because Buffalo unleashed a weapon that the NFL had never seen before, the no-huddle K-gun offense. They would refuse to let defenses substitute or even catch their breath. By the time opponents got lined up, Buffalo was already snapping the ball. Thurman Thomas was a matchup nightmare, able to rip off 200-yard rushing nights or line up as a receiver. Andre Reed made his living over the middle, and James Lofton stretched defenses deep. On the other side, Bruce Smith had one of the greatest defensive seasons, winning Defensive Player of the Year with 19 sacks.
Want that Defensive Player of the Year now.
Buffalo led the league in points, posted the best point differential in the NFL, and went 8-0 at home. The season had moments of chaos, too, like back-to-back weeks where the Bills erased double-digit fourth-quarter deficits with special teams touchdowns and defensive scores. And by the time the postseason arrived, the Bills were a machine. They brushed off Dan Marino and the Dolphins in a snowy shootout, then delivered one of the most brutal playoff performances ever. At halftime, the scoreboard already read 41-3, and when it was over, the Raiders had been buried 51-3. To do it in the fashion that we did, 51-3, was almost unbelievable. And then came Super Bowl 25, a clash of extremes. The Bills' tempo and firepower against the Giants' grinded-out ball control. New York played keep away, but Buffalo still had their chance. Down 1, with seconds left, Scott Norwood lined up for a 47-yard field goal, the kick that would change the franchise forever. It missed wide right. But regardless, the Bills had just put on one of the most legendary offensive seasons the NFL had ever seen. But fast forward to 2015, and nobody expected Carolina to dominate. They had just lost their top receiver, Kelvin Benjamin, to a torn ACL in training camp. Analysts said Cam Newton didn't have enough weapons. And yet, this was the year Cam became Superman. He didn't just celebrate like it, he played like it. Newton threw for 35 touchdowns, ran for another 10, and became the first player in NFL history with at least 30 passing scores and 10 rushing in a season. Luke Kuechly anchored a defense that forced a league-high 39 turnovers. Josh Norman turned himself into a lockdown corner and the league's biggest trash talker.
Please, whatever you do not run your mouth to your wide receiver and you expect to show up on Sundays, because I'm telling you, we are here and we're waiting.
And Thomas Davis, playing with a surgically repaired arm, still making tackles. They opened 14-0, scored over 500 points, and outscored opponents by almost 200. Along the way, they embarrassed Dallas on Thanksgiving, dropped 38-0 on Atlanta, and beat Aaron Rodgers' Packers in a wild shootout. By the time the playoffs arrived, they looked inevitable.
Cam Newton talking about the Seahawks, he said they are our nemesis.
Carolina crushed Seattle with a 31-0 first half and destroyed Arizona 49-15 in the NFC Championship, punching their ticket to Super Bowl 50 at 17-1. But on the biggest stage, Von Miller and the Broncos defense harassed Newton all night, sacking him 6 times. The defining moment came late in the fourth quarter. Newton dropped back, was hit, and the ball popped loose on the turf. The MVP had a chance to dive on it, but he didn't. That single hesitation became the lasting image of the game. The Superman who had spent the year soaring was remembered most for not jumping on the football, and that still haunts him to this day.
It ain't no excuse for me not jumping on the fumble. Okay. I should have jumped.
The ending was brutal, but it doesn't erase what 2015 meant. For one season, the Panthers were a phenomenon. Charlotte felt football's supremacy, and Cam Newton was the most unstoppable force in the league. And at just 26 years old, it felt like Newton was about to enter his prime. However, that year would be his peak, as well as the peak of the Panthers franchise as a whole to this point. Now, going from one of the league's most explosive offenses to one of the most feared defenses in NFL history, we have the 1985 Chicago Bears. They were chaos wrapped in shoulder pads. Mike Ditka brought the fire, Buddy Ryan brought the fury. Together, they built a team that felt less like an NFL roster and more like an army. Ryan's 46 defense turned linemen and linebackers into heat-seeking missiles. Mike Singletary's eyes burning through backfields, Richard Dent and Dan Hampton collapsing pockets, and William Refrigerator Perry becoming a 300-pound phenomenon who could line up anywhere and wreak havoc. The results were absurd. Chicago allowed just 12 points per game all season. They led the league in sacks, interceptions, and intimidation. And when the playoffs rolled around, they didn't allow a single point in the NFC. Back-to-back shutouts against the Giants and Rams. But this wasn't only about defense. Walter Payton, the heartbeat of Chicago football, gave the offense steady greatness. Jim McMahon brought unpredictability, showing up in headbands, throwing bombs when you least expect it, and ticking off opponents almost as much as he beat them. And speedster Willie Gault added a vertical threat that made this group more dangerous than people give credit for. By the time they reached the Super Bowl, the Bears were larger than life. They had the dominance, they had the personality, and they even had the Super Bowl Shuffle, a rap song recorded mid-season bragging about a championship they hadn't won yet.
We're not here to start no trouble. We're just here to do the Super Bowl Shuffle.
It sounded insane until they backed it up with one of the most lopsided performances in NFL history, a 46-10 win over the Patriots. A defense that good made quarterbacks almost irrelevant, but imagine what this team could have done if they had a quarterback like Joe Burrow. For 3 decades, the Cincinnati Bengals were stuck in NFL limbo. No playoff wins since 1990. A revolving door of quarterbacks. A franchise more associated with heartbreak than hope. Then 2021 hit. Joe Burrow was supposed to still be recovering from a torn ACL. Instead, he looked like he'd been built for this exact moment. His reunion with LSU teammate Jamar Chase lit up the league instantly as Chase torched defenses for 1,455 yards and 13 touchdowns as a rookie. The Bengals weren't perfect. They only went 10-7, and their offensive line was a disaster. Burrow was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL that year, getting dragged down 51 times in the regular season. Somehow he kept standing back up and delivering, and that resilience became this team's identity. They didn't fold in close games. They didn't back down from bigger opponents, and they captured the AFC North, their first division title since 2015, on their way to the playoffs. And then history started to shift. They snapped the NFL's longest playoff drought with a win over the Raiders.
And for the first time in 31 years, Cincinnati, your Bengals have won a playoff game.
They went on the road and knocked off the top-seeded Titans, picking off Ryan Tannehill 3 times. Then came the Chiefs, a dynasty in the making with Patrick Mahomes and Arrowhead Stadium at full volume. Down 21-3, it looked over, but Burrow refused to blink. Slowly, the Bengals chipped away until the unthinkable happened. Overtime.
It is tails.
A field goal.
And Cincinnati is heading to the Super Bowl.
And Cincinnati was suddenly headed to the Super Bowl for the first time in 33 years. In Super Bowl 56, they fought hard against the Rams. One defensive stop stood between them and a Lombardi trophy, but Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford ripped that dream away in the final minutes, 3 points short of immortality. Still, that team shattered every narrative around the franchise. They did it with a terrible line, a quarterback who was supposed to be still rehabbing, and a rookie receiver rewriting record books. With a young core, you'd think they'd be set up to contend for years. So far, though, that hasn't happened. Thanks largely to a defense and O-line that just hasn't been good enough. Maybe one day they'll get their first championship, but at least their future looks bright. For the Browns, though, the wait has been even longer. And in the Super Bowl era, their closest shot came 38 years ago. Because when you think of the Cleveland Browns, heartbreak usually comes first.
I'm very upset. Very upset. It's a Browns thing to do, though.
I don't feel great. Honestly, I don't feel great. I
feel depressed.
But in 1987, this franchise had everything lined up for a Super Bowl run. The Browns were led by quarterback Bernie Kosar, a hometown hero with a strange throwing motion, but ice in his veins. His connection with wideouts like Webster Slaughter and Reggie Langhorne gave Cleveland a balanced attack, while running back Ernest Biner brought toughness to the ground game. And on defense, guys like Clay Matthews, father of future Packers star Clay Matthews Jr., anchored a unit that thrived on physicality. Cleveland finished 10-5 and took its third straight AFC Central crown under Marty Schottenheimer. In the divisional round, they rolled the Colts 38-21, setting up another AFC Championship clash with John Elway's Denver Broncos, the exact same stage where Elway's legendary 98-yard march, better known as the Drive, had crushed him a year earlier. But this time, the Browns refused to back down. Denver got out to a huge halftime lead, but Kosar and Biner dragged Cleveland back into the fight. The Browns scored 30 second-half points, and with just over a minute left, had the ball inside the Denver 10, charging toward the tying touchdown. Then came the moment that defined the franchise. Biner took a handoff, lowered his shoulder, and pushed for the end zone. He was 2 yards away when Denver defensive back Jeremiah Castile ripped the ball loose.
Fumble the ball, and Denver has recovered.
Just like that, the ball and Cleveland's season were gone. When I'm walking off the field, it's a miserable feeling, of course. We lost, and the fans give us a standing ovation. I don't take consolation in losses, but it really was an emotionally cool year, and the fans appreciated it even in a loss. Meanwhile, the Broncos were rebuilding, and by the late 1990s, the Broncos had built something legendary. A year earlier, in '97, John Elway had finally broken through with his first Super Bowl win. But instead of easing off, Denver came back even stronger, determined to erase all doubt about who ran the NFL. They opened the season by ripping off 13 straight wins. It was the longest unbeaten start since the 1972 Dolphins. At the center of it all was Terrell Davis, who authored one of the greatest rushing seasons in league history. Davis bulldozed his way to 2,008 yards and 21 touchdowns, only the fourth back ever to cross the 2,000-yard mark. Elway, in his final season, didn't have to carry the load. He had precision targets in Rod Smith, Ed McCaffrey, and Shannon Sharp, an offensive line stacked with Pro Bowlers, and a kicker in Jason Elam who nailed a 63-yarder to tie, at the time, the NFL record. And on the other side of the ball, Steve Atwater, Bill Romanowski, and Neil Smith gave the defense its bite. When the postseason arrived, Denver opened by dismantling Miami 38-3, their first win over the Dolphins since 1968. In the AFC Championship, the Jets jumped out to a 10-0 lead, but the Broncos forced 6 turnovers and stormed back with 23 unanswered points to punch their ticket to Super Bowl 33. Waiting for him was Dan Reeves, the coach Elway had clashed with for years, leading the Atlanta Falcons. The storyline was elite, but the game itself wasn't close. Elway threw for 336 yards, added a rushing touchdown, and walked away with Super Bowl MVP honors in a 34-19 win. The Broncos finished 17-2, outscored opponents by nearly 200 points, and secured back-to-back titles, the first AFC team to do it in nearly 2 decades. For Elway, it was the ultimate send-off.
It's time for me to move on. I can't do it physically anymore. And that's really hard for me to say.
A send-off no player from this next team has been able to experience yet, because the Detroit Lions spent decades as the NFL's punchline. But in 2024, they authored something no fan alive had ever seen. They ripped through their schedule to a 15-2 record, the best in franchise history. They swept the NFC North for the first time ever. They went undefeated on the road, and both losses came by a combined 10 points. Detroit scored 564 points, the most in the league, and one of the top marks in NFL history, finishing with a plus 222-point differential. They had 6 All-Pros, 8 Pro Bowlers, and an offense that could bury teams in an instant. Jared Goff delivered his most efficient season as a pro. Rookie Jahmyr Gibbs paired with David Montgomery to produce the NFL's most dangerous backfield, with Montgomery racking up a league-best 20 touchdowns before injuries hit. Amon-Ra St. Brown cemented himself as an elite receiver, and the offensive line mauled opponents all year. Even the defense, rocked by injuries, still finished top 10 in points allowed, led by Aiden Hutchinson when healthy. Blowouts stacked up: 47-9 over Dallas, 52-6 over Jacksonville, 52-14 over Tennessee. For the first time in franchise history, Detroit earned the NFC's #1 seed. The path to a Super Bowl was laid out in front of them, at home, in front of a city starved for glory. But in the divisional round, defensive injuries left Detroit's secondary exposed, and rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels took full advantage, lighting up the Lions and beating them 45-31. A team that looked like it could change history instead joined it in the worst way, becoming only the second 15-win team ever to exit without a playoff victory.
And Washington will be going to the NFC Championship for the first time in 33 years.
It's my fault. It's my fault.
Following the season, the Lions lost both their coordinators, Ben Johnson to the Bears and Aaron Glenn to the Jets. The 2024 Lions might be remembered as the greatest team in franchise history, and also the one that left Detroit wondering how much more it could have been. They still have Super Bowl aspirations, but losing both coordinators hurts, especially in a stacked division that includes the Green Bay Packers. By the mid-90s, Green Bay had history, but not recent glory. Nearly 3 decades had passed since their last Super Bowl. That all changed in 1996. Green Bay finished 13-3, and for the first time since 1962, they went undefeated at Lambeau. They scored more points than anyone in the league and gave up the fewest. No team had done both in the same season since the undefeated 72 Dolphins, and Brett Favre was the heart of it. In the middle of his 3 straight MVPs, he threw a career-high 39 touchdowns, more than any quarterback in the NFL. He carved up defenses with Antonio Freeman, Keith Jackson, and midseason pickup Andre Rison, while Dorsey Levens gave them balance on the ground. But the secret weapon was everywhere else. Their defense allowed just 19 touchdowns all year. Reggie White terrorized quarterbacks. Leroy Butler owned the secondary. And even on special teams, Desmond Howard set an NFL record for punt return yards. By the time the playoffs rolled around, Green Bay looked untouchable. They blew out the 49ers, handled a tough Carolina team in the NFC Championship, and marched into New Orleans for Super Bowl 31. That night, the Packers' speed, power, and swagger were all on display. Favre delivered haymakers through the air. Reggie White closed the door with 3 sacks, and Desmond Howard had a 99-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. When the confetti fell, Green Bay had its first Lombardi trophy since Vince Lombardi himself. And Desmond Howard earned Super Bowl MVP honors with his 244 total return yards, becoming the only special teams player to do so in modern Super Bowl history. And not long after, the NFL landscape shifted, with a brand new franchise entering the league in 2002. The Houston Texans remain the NFL's youngest franchise, but despite their age, in 2012, they looked like a team ready to make history. They came out firing, ripping off an 11-1 start and punishing teams on both sides of the ball. On offense, running back Arian Foster was unstoppable, piling up over 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns, while Andre Johnson reminded everyone why he was one of the best receivers of his era. But the heartbeat of that team was defense. J.J. Watt put together one of the greatest seasons any defender has ever had. 20.5 sacks, 39 tackles for loss, 16 pass deflections, and a Defensive Player of the Year award to go with it.
Are you kidding me? I'm beating these guys like a drum out here.
The statement game came in Week 3 at Denver. Facing Peyton Manning, Matt Schaub threw 4 touchdowns, including a 60-yard bomb to Andre Johnson, and even came back after losing a chunk of his ear on a brutal hit. By December, though, the armor started to crack. A late-season skid dropped them from the AFC's top seed to 12-4. They still knocked out Cincinnati in the wildcard round, but in Foxborough the next week, Tom Brady torched them for 41 points, ending Houston's run. Foxborough. One man's greatest nightmare, because for years, Peyton Manning and the Colts would dominate the regular season, pile up gaudy stats, and then watch it all crumble in January, more often than not to Tom Brady's Patriots.
The New England Patriots are going to the Super Bowl.
6 playoff runs had ended without a Super Bowl appearance. Manning could win in October, but never when it mattered most. The Colts tore out of the gate with 9 straight wins, powered by Manning's precision. Marvin Harrison was still an artist with his routes. Reggie Wayne had stepped fully into stardom, and rookie Joseph Adai gave the offense fresh balance. With Dallas Clark roaming the middle and Adam Vinatieri replacing Mike Vanderjagt, Indianapolis had answers everywhere. But there was one glaring problem: the run defense. It was historically bad. 5.3 yards allowed per carry, the worst in the league and one of the worst ever. Critics circled it as the fatal flaw. Even at 12-4, whispers followed them into postseason. Another collapse was coming. Against the Chiefs, everyone expected Larry Johnson to shred Indy's front. He had 416 carries that season, one of the heaviest workloads in NFL history, but the Colts stuffed him for just 32 yards. In Baltimore, the offense sputtered, but Vinatieri drilled 5 field goals and the defense suffocated Steve McNair. Then came the game that defined Manning's career, the AFC Championship against the Patriots. Brady practically owned Manning, and when the Patriots jumped out 21-3, every Colts fan saw the nightmare on repeat. But Manning carved New England for 349 yards, led a 32-point second half, and finished off the largest comeback in conference title game history, 38-34. And 2 weeks later in Miami, destiny was sealed. The Bears' defense had been feared all year, but Manning spread the ball to everyone. Adai and Dominic Rhodes gashed Chicago's front. Final score, 29-17. It was Indianapolis's first Super Bowl since moving from Baltimore, Manning's long-awaited coronation, and Tony Dungy's historic moment as the first black head coach to win it all. Years earlier, another AFC South team was making their presence felt. Expansion teams usually take decades to figure it out. But under Tom Coughlin, Jacksonville had built one of the most complete rosters in the NFL in just 5 years. They stormed through the regular season with a franchise-best 14-2 record. And the craziest part? Both of those losses came against the same team, the Tennessee Titans. Jags QB Mark Brunell ran a sharp, efficient passing game. Receiver Jimmy Smith had the best year of his career with 1,636 yards, second in the league. And Keenan McCardle was the perfect complement. Fred Taylor ripped off 1,200 yards on the ground with his game-breaking speed. And the offensive line, anchored by Tony Baselli and Leon Searcy, sent 2 tackles to the Pro Bowl. On defense, the leap was just as dramatic. With Dom Capers now coordinating, Jacksonville went from 25th in total defense the year before to 4th. They gave up only 217 points all year, an absurd 13.6 per game. Tony Brackens was a force with 12 sacks. Kevin Hardy had 10.5 from linebacker, and veteran Carnell Lake stabilized the secondary. Jacksonville opened the playoffs by absolutely humiliating the Miami Dolphins 62-7 in what became Dan Marino's final game. The AFC Championship felt like the moment everything had been building toward. Home field, the league's best record, and a chance to finally take down the Titans. Revenge was on the table. Instead, Tennessee walked in and broke them again, 33-14. Then came 2018, and the Chiefs found what they'd always been missing: Patrick Mahomes. The year before, Mahomes had taken the league by storm, winning MVP with 50 touchdowns. In 2019, defenses adjusted, injuries struck, and he still threw for 4,031 yards and 26 scores, despite missing 2 games. He had Tyreek Hill stretching the field, Travis Kelce piling up 97 catches for 1,229 yards, and rookie Mecole Hardman adding 6 touchdowns on limited touches. Together, they became known as the Legion of Zoom. But the bigger shift came on defense, because with Steve Spagnuolo calling plays, Tyrann Mathieu's versatility reshaped the secondary. Chris Jones logged 9 sacks, and Frank Clark closed games with postseason heroics. After ranking near the bottom in 2018, the unit finished 7th in scoring defense. Down 24-0 in the divisional round to Houston, Mahomes threw 5 touchdown passes in 20 minutes, as the Chiefs scored 51 of the next 58 points.
Normally 24 points, you're like, man, we got to methodically get our way back into this ball game. Hopefully get to the 3rd or 4th quarter, we can make it a game. In 9.5 minutes, he erased it.
In the AFC title game, his 27-yard scramble headlined a 35-24 win over Derrick Henry's Titans. And in Super Bowl 54, trailing 20-10 with 7 minutes left, Mahomes delivered again.
Hill, open, caught!
21 unanswered points in a 31-20 win. The 2019 Chiefs became the first team in NFL history to erase 3 double-digit deficits in a single postseason, finally giving Andy Reid his ring and ended Kansas City's half-century drought. More importantly, they marked the beginning of the Patrick Mahomes era. What started as a feel-good story has since transformed into something else entirely. Because now the Chiefs are no longer the underdog chasing history. They're the villains of the NFL, a villain that the division rival Raiders have grown to despise. But back in 1976, the Raiders were football's biggest villains. Their secondary even had a name, the Soul Patrol. Jack Tatum was the ringleader, nicknamed the Assassin. He delivered hits so violent, they became highlights of NFL film reels for decades. George Atkinson specialized in headhunting, so much so that Steelers coach Chuck Noll once accused him of running a criminal element in football. Willie Brown would bait QBs into making throws, then making them pay. And Dr. Death? He earned that nickname because receivers never forgot meeting him across the middle. Behind them, the front seven wasn't any less scary. Ted Hendricks, a 6'7" linebacker known as the Mad Stork, blocked kicks, batted down passes, and used his freakish wingspan to wreck game plans. Otis Sistrunk was literally introduced on TV as
"This is Otis Sistrunk from the University of Mars."
And John Matuszak was a 6'8", 280-pound menace. The Raiders were serious contenders under QB Ken Stabler and head coach John Madden, but they'd been punched out of the playoffs again and again, mostly by Pittsburgh. By 76, they'd had enough. They finished 13-1, then beat New England in the Sugar Bear Hamilton revenge game before finally steamrolling the Steelers 24-7 in the AFC Championship. And when they got to the Super Bowl, they put every bit of that violence, swagger, and talent on display. Clarence Davis gashed Minnesota for 137 yards. Biletnikoff kept finding holes in the defense, winning MVP. And the Raiders' defense slammed the door shut with Willie Brown's 75-yard pick six. The final score, 32-14. Oakland had its first championship. To this day, if I had one drive I had to make to win a game, I'd want Kenny Stabler as a quarterback, John Madden said 39 years later. Sticking in the AFC West, we saw a team with one of the best rosters in history. A team with 9 Pro Bowlers, 4 All-Pros, and the NFL's leading rusher, the 2007 Los Angeles Chargers. Phillip Rivers was settling in as the franchise quarterback. Antonio Gates was uncoverable, redefining the tight end position. And LaDainian Tomlinson, fresh off a record-shattering MVP season, still led the league in rushing with nearly 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns. On defense, Sean Merriman brought 12.5 sacks. Sean Phillips terrorized quarterbacks on the other side, and Jamal Williams anchored in the middle. Then there was Antonio Cromartie, who had 10 interceptions and delivered a 109-yard missed field goal return that remains the longest touchdown in NFL history. After stumbling to a 1-3 start, they ripped off 10 wins in their last 12 games, including a 6-game win streak to close the year. They finished 11-5, captured the AFC West, and rolled into January with momentum. But that's where the real battle started. In the wild card, the defense suffocated Tennessee. A week later came Indianapolis, the defending champions, led by Peyton Manning in their own building. However, they wouldn't walk out in a great position because Tomlinson was knocked out early with a knee injury, and Rivers tore his ACL mid-game. Somehow, Billy Volek, the backup, finished the job, leading a fourth-quarter touchdown drive to steal a 28-24 win on the road. And then, unbelievably, Rivers suited up the very next week, playing on a torn ACL in the AFC Championship. Against a 17-0 Patriots team loaded with Tom Brady and Randy Moss, the Chargers fought as long as they could, but the injuries were too much, and the dream ended one step short. But their run cemented them as one of the toughest and most talented teams of the 2000s. With stars all over the field and a quarterback literally playing on one leg, they showed the kind of heart and fire that made them unforgettable. Now, across town, the Rams had just finished last in their division in 1998. A year later, they pulled off one of the most shocking turnarounds in NFL history.
St. Louis's offense is as good as ever. Check out these numbers. They rank first in overall offense and first in passing yards.
Practically overnight, they went from an afterthought to unleashing an attack so fast, so relentless, and so overwhelming that defenses couldn't keep up. The greatest show on turf. Quarterback Trent Green was supposed to lead the charge, but a preseason knee injury opened the door for Kurt Warner, an undrafted former grocery store clerk who had been playing in the Arena League just a few years earlier. In his first full season as a starter, Warner shredded the NFL for 4,353 yards and 41 touchdowns, winning league MVP. He had weapons everywhere. Marshall Faulk, fresh off a trade from Indianapolis, became the prototype for the modern all-purpose back. 2,429 yards from scrimmage, third most in NFL history at the time. Isaac Bruce was already a Pro Bowl threat. Rookie Torrey Holt exploded immediately, and as Zahir Hakim stretched defenses with pure speed. they scored at will, piling up 526 points, 32.9 per game, and topping 30 points in 12 different games. Defensive end Kevin Carter led the league with 17 sacks. The Rams returned 7 interceptions for touchdowns, and they finished with the NFL's best point differential at plus 284. And in the playoffs, the offense kept humming. They hung 49 on Minnesota, then survived a brutal 11-6 defensive slugfest against Tampa Bay to punch their ticket to Atlanta. And Super Bowl 34 delivered the perfect stage for their act. Warner threw for a Super Bowl record 414 yards, including a 73-yard bomb to Isaac Bruce that gave St. Louis the lead late. But the defining play came on defense. Mike Jones's tackle of Kevin Dyson at the 1-yard line as time expired, preserving a 23-16 win. It was the franchise's first Super Bowl title and the NFL's first true dome team champion. They were insane, no doubt, but not flawless. There's only one team to ever accomplish that, the 1972 Miami Dolphins. Just 1 year earlier, Miami was embarrassed 24-3 in the Super Bowl, and head coach Don Shula was starting to earn a reputation as the guy who couldn't win the big one. But that loss, it lit a fire. Shula rebuilt the Dolphins into the most disciplined, physical, and balanced roster the league had ever seen. On offense, they had Hall of Famers everywhere. Paul Warfield stretching defenses, a dominant line with Larry Little and Jim Langer, and a three-headed backfield of Larry Zonka, Mercury Morris, and Jim Kick that could bludgeon or outrun anyone. In fact, Zonka and Morris became the first running back duo in NFL history to both top 1,000 yards in the same season. On the other side of the ball, the no-name defense, a label given to them by Tom Landry because they lacked household stars, turned out to be a nightmare for opponents. But in Week 5, disaster struck, or so it seemed. QB Bob Greasy broke his ankle. Now, most teams would have folded, but 38-year-old Earl Morrall stepped in and played like he'd been waiting his whole career for this moment. He guided Miami to win after win, and when Greasy returned late in the playoffs, the Dolphins had a problem. 2 quarterbacks capable of taking them the distance. They finished number 1 in both scoring offense and scoring defense, something no other team has ever done in NFL history. Miami steamrolled to 14-0, but critics downplayed it. The knock was that their schedule was soft, that they hadn't truly been tested. The playoffs changed that. Morrall started the divisional round and did enough to help Miami beat Cleveland 20-14. In the AFC Championship, Greasy returned to the lineup and led the Dolphins past Pittsburgh 21-17, sending Miami back to the Super Bowl. And what followed was one of the most physical title games ever played. Miami's ground game controlled the clock, the defense held firm, and even when a botched field goal turned into a Washington touchdown late, the Dolphins never lost control. Final score, 14-7. The 17-0 season was complete. And to this day, no one else has matched that perfection. Although, the Vikings got close. Because back in 1998, they assembled a God squad that all started at the draft. Minnesota already had Chris Carter, the steady Hall of Fame veteran, and Jake Reed, fresh off 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Then Randy Moss slipped all the way to pick 21. Teams passed on him because of character concerns. Not Minnesota. In his rookie year, Moss put up 17 touchdowns and over 1,300 yards. With Carter's route running, Reed's consistency, and Moss terrorizing secondaries, quarterback Randall Cunningham suddenly looked like a man reborn at 35 years old. He threw for over 3,700 yards and 34 touchdowns, directing an offense that set an NFL record with 556 points, averaging nearly 35 a game. Robert Smith rushed for over 1,000 yards, Leroy Horde added 11 touchdowns on the ground, and Gary Anderson became the first kicker in league history to go perfect on every field goal and extra point. Meanwhile, John Randall led a defense that ranked top 6 in scoring, giving Minnesota balance to go with their firepower. 12 of their 15 wins came by double digits, and their only loss was a 3-point slip in Tampa. By season's end, they were 15-1, only the 3rd team in NFL history to hit that mark. 10 Pro Bowlers, 8 All-Pros, the number 1 seed in the NFC. In the playoffs, they kept rolling. A 41-21 beatdown of the Cardinals sent them to their first NFC Championship game in over a decade. The Metrodome was deafening, and Minnesota looked every bit like a team destined to finish the job. With under 3 minutes left in the NFC Championship, Minnesota led Atlanta 27-20. All they needed was one more kick to ice it. Gary Anderson, perfect all year, lined up for a 39-yarder, and he missed. his only miss of the season. The Falcons seized the break, tied the game, and in overtime, their kicker Morten Andersen drilled the winner. But even in defeat, that 15-1 Vikings team was one of the most electrifying offenses the NFL has ever seen. Randy Moss rewriting the deep ball, Chris Carter carving up defenses, and Randall Cunningham playing the best football of his career. But speaking of Randy Moss, there was a time when he was paired with the greatest QB in NFL history. When people debate the Patriots' best team, the conversation almost always starts with 2007. That group bulldozed the NFL at 16-0. Tom Brady broke the touchdown record, and Randy Moss rewrote history books. But all of that dominance ended with one of the biggest gut punches in NFL history. That's why 2016 stands above the rest. It wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience, execution, and finishing the job. The year started with Tom Brady suspended for the first 4 games because of Deflategate. Most expected New England to stumble, but Jimmy Garoppolo and rookie Jacoby Brissett delivered a 3-1 record and kept the Patriots in control. When Brady came back at age 39, he put together the most efficient season of his career. 28 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, and the best touchdown-to-interception ratio the league had ever seen. The Patriots went 14-2 and became only the 7th team ever to finish 8-0 on the road. The postseason cemented the team's legacy, because against Houston in the divisional round, Dion Lewis pulled off something no player had ever done in the NFL playoffs, scoring a rushing, receiving, and kickoff return touchdown in the same game. Then came the AFC Championship, where Brady torched the Steelers for 384 yards and 3 scores, with Hogan racking up a franchise record 180 receiving yards in a playoff game. That set the stage for Super Bowl 51, which seemed to be a disaster. New England trailed the Falcons 28-3 with 17 minutes left. No team had ever overcome more than a 10-point Super Bowl deficit. Yet, play by play, they closed the gap. Hightower's strip sack, James White's touchdowns, Edelman's impossible fingertip catch.
Oh, that's a catch.
When Amendola tied it on a 2-point conversion, the Patriots had erased a 25-point hole. Overtime was simple. Brady to Edelman, Hogan, Amendola, and White until the Falcons broke. White's walk-off run sealed a 34-28 win and the Patriots' 5th championship. Brady finished with 466 yards on 62 attempts, breaking multiple Super Bowl records.
This is the greatest performance I've ever seen.
New England celebrated its 5th title just 7 years after New Orleans had a season that would transform their franchise forever. For over 40 years, the New Orleans Saints had been flat-out awful. In fact, fans would wear paper bags over their heads and call them the Aints. But in 2009, everything changed, and Drew Brees was the engine. Left for dead after a shoulder injury in San Diego, he reinvented himself in New Orleans, and by 2009, he was unstoppable. Surrounded by weapons like Marquez Colston, DeVary Henderson, Pierre Thomas, and a rejuvenated Reggie Bush, the Saints buried teams early. Defensively, Greg Williams' unit wasn't perfect, but they were predators. Darren Sharper roamed the secondary with 9 interceptions. Jonathan Vilma controlled the middle, and when games tightened, this group delivered momentum-shifting turnovers that flipped entire outcomes. The Saints opened the year 13-0, the best in NFC history, before finishing 13-3 and locking up the first #1 seed in franchise history, when the playoffs turned into a gauntlet of future Hall of Fame quarterbacks. First came Kurt Warner, the defending NFC champ, and the Saints overwhelmed Arizona 45-14, capped off by Reggie Bush's electrifying 83-yard punt return. Next was Brett Favre and the Vikings in one of the most chaotic NFC championships ever played. Adrian Peterson scored 3 touchdowns. Favre threw for 310 yards, but Tracy Porter's late interception set up Garrett Hartley's game-winning 40-yard field goal in overtime. For the first time ever, the Saints were going to the Super Bowl. And on the biggest stage, they faced Peyton Manning and the heavily favored Colts. Indianapolis struck first, but Sean Payton stunned everyone with ambush, an onside kick to open the second half. New Orleans recovered, flipped the momentum, and never gave it back. Brees was surgical, completing 32 passes and finding Jeremy Shockey for the go-ahead touchdown. Then, with Indy driving late, Porter struck again, jumping a Manning pass and racing 74 yards to seal a 31-17 victory. Just 4 years after Hurricane Katrina, the Saints had delivered New Orleans its first championship. But while the Saints' 09's triumph was emotional, the 86 Giants' domination was ruthless, because they had something unstoppable. Lawrence Taylor, arguably the most feared defender in NFL history.
You better hope I never gonna kick your
That year, LT racked up 20.5 sacks and became the first unanimous defensive MVP in NFL history. Surrounding him was the Big Blue Wrecking Crew: Harry Carson, Carl Banks, Leonard Marshall, and Jim Burt. A defense led by defensive coordinator Bill Belichick that finished second in both yards and points allowed and left opponents physically broken by the end of games. Joe Morris bulldozed his way to over 1,500 rushing yards and 21 touchdowns. Mark Bavaro became the definition of an Iron Man at tight end, and Phil Simms ran the show. And the results spoke for themselves. A 14-2 record, a 9-game win streak to close the season, and a playoff run that looked like a demolition derby. They obliterated the 49ers 49-3, knocking Joe Montana out of the game and returning his intercepted pass for a touchdown. A week later, they shut out Washington 17-0, allowing the Redskins just 2 first downs in the first half. And then came the Super Bowl. Over 101,000 fans packed into the Rose Bowl. At halftime, Denver actually held a 10-9 lead. But that's when Phil Simms delivered the half of his life. He completed 22 of 25 passes for 268 yards and 3 touchdowns, as the Giants poured in 30 second-half points, winning 39-20, their first of 4 championships to this day. Unfortunately, their New York counterpart, the Jets, haven't been as fortunate. Back in 1968, the AFL was still dismissed as second best compared to the NFL. That perception would never be the same after this team. At the center of it all was Joe Namath. Broadway Joe wasn't just a quarterback. He was a showman, a celebrity, and the first player to bring swagger to the position. That season, he became the first in pro football history to throw for over 4,000 yards. He had Don Maynard stretching the field, George Sauer working defenses underneath, and Matt Snell pounding out yards when the game called for toughness. But what made the Jets complete was their defense. Jerry Philbin and Verlin Biggs anchored the line, while linebackers like Larry Grantham and Al Atkinson gave the unit a mix of speed and grit. New York finished 11-3, then beat the defending champion Oakland Raiders in a wild AFL championship game, 27-23. That victory earned them a shot at the mighty Baltimore Colts, a team many believed was one of the greatest in NFL history. And that's when Joe Namath made his move. Days before the game, he delivered one of the boldest statements in sport history. He guaranteed the Jets would win. The football world thought it was laughable, but the way the next 60 minutes unfolded changed the sport forever. On offense, Matt Snell delivered the performance of his life, slashing through the Colts for 121 yards and a touchdown. Namath, for all his reputation as a gunslinger, didn't need to throw a single touchdown. Jim Turner added 3 field goals, and as the minutes ticked away, the scoreboard read 16-7. That game gave the Jets their only championship, legitimized the AFL, and set the stage for an AFL-NFL merger. After the Jets shocked the world, the torch of greatness had been passed from one era to the next, and no franchise of the 80s embodied dominance quite like the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners had their fair share of stacked rosters. Their 1989 squad outscored its playoff opponents 126-26 and delivered the most lopsided Super Bowl win ever. The 1994 team gave Steve Young his long-awaited moment, with Jerry Rice still rewriting the record books. But before those heights, the 1984 team showed the world what true dominance looked like, as this was the season when Walsh's West Coast offense became unstoppable. Joe Montana put up over 3,600 yards and 28 touchdowns. In the backfield, Wendell Tyler provided balance, while Roger Craig became the NFL's first true dual-threat back, catching passes out of the backfield. But unlike some years when offenses stole the headlines, 1984 was about a defense that flat-out smothered people. They ranked number 1 in points allowed. Ronnie Lott and Dwight Hicks led a secondary that produced 23 interceptions, while the unit as a whole forced 48 total takeaways. San Francisco finished 15-1, outscoring opponents by 248 points and becoming the first team in NFL history to win 15 regular season games. In the postseason, the 49ers beat the next 2 Super Bowl champions, New York in the divisional round and the Chicago Bears in the NFC Championship, before meeting Dan Marino's Dolphins in Super Bowl 19. Marino had just set single-season records with 5,084 passing yards and 48 touchdowns, but San Francisco's defense held Miami to just 1 touchdown after the first quarter, while Montana threw for 331 yards and 3 touchdowns, adding a rushing score on his way to Super Bowl MVP in a 38-16 win.
All we heard all week long was Miami's offense. How are you going to stop them? And we just knew that we had an offense too, and no one was thinking about having to stop us.
And another defense that dominated can be found just north in Seattle. The 2013 Seahawks were a team that thrived on intimidation, built around the NFL's most dominant defense, the Legion of Boom. They allowed just 14.4 points per game, the best mark in the league, and led the NFL in points allowed, yards allowed, and takeaways, a rare defensive triple crown that no team had accomplished since the '85 Bears. Richard Sherman led the NFL with 8 interceptions, Earl Thomas earned first-team All-Pro honors, and Cam Chancellor added 99 tackles with his trademark physicality. Bobby Wagner, only in his second year, racked up 120 tackles, anchoring the middle of the field. Up front, Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett combined for 16.5 sacks, providing the pass rush that made the secondary even more dangerous. The offense was built around balance. Marshawn Lynch ran for 1,257 yards and 12 touchdowns, while Russell Wilson threw for 3,357 yards, 26 touchdowns, and just 9 interceptions, with a 101.2 passer rating, the third best in the league. In the postseason, the Seahawks allowed just 3 offensive touchdowns in 3 games. Their NFC Championship win included Sherman's famous tipped pass that sealed a 23-17 victory over San Francisco.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
All of it built toward a matchup against one of the most statistically dominant offenses the NFL had ever seen, Peyton Manning's record-breaking Broncos, fresh off a season where he threw 55 touchdowns and the Broncos averaged 37.9 points per game. How do you stop that? Well, for the Legion of Boom, it was simple, actually. They held the Broncos to just 8 points, forced 4 turnovers, and scored in every phase of the game, including a kickoff return touchdown by Percy Harvin.
Touchdown, Seattle!
The final score read 43-8, the largest margin of victory in Super Bowl history. But while Seattle carved a legacy with defense, Tampa Bay made theirs with a 43-year-old. The 2002 Buccaneers will always hold a special place in the hearts of Tampa Bay fans as the franchise's first title team. But the 2020 Buccaneers were a more balanced team who put together one of the most dominant performances in Super Bowl history. And it all started with one man, Tom Brady. The Bucs signed him to a roster loaded with weapons. Mike Evans became the first player in NFL history to start his career with 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and the defense was built around speed and versatility, including Devin White, Levante David, Shaquille Barrett, and the young Antoine Winfield Jr. After finishing 11-5, the Bucs found themselves in a playoff gauntlet like no other. They knocked off Drew Brees in New Orleans in what became his final NFL game, beat league MVP Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau Field, and then faced Patrick Mahomes and the defending champion Chiefs in Super Bowl 45. The Chiefs, who averaged nearly 30 points per game, were held to 0 touchdowns and just 9 points total. Mahomes was pressured on 29 of his 56 dropbacks, the most in Super Bowl history. Meanwhile, Brady stayed clinical, throwing 3 touchdowns, 2 of them to Rob Gronkowski, who added to his own legendary postseason resume. Leonard Fournette, nicknamed Playoff Lenny, sealed the game with a 29-yard touchdown run, capping off a postseason where he scored in every single game. The 31-9 victory made them the first team ever to win the Super Bowl in their home stadium. Brady earned his 5th Super Bowl MVP and his 7th championship, giving him more titles than every single NFL franchise. But greatness in the NFL doesn't always mean sustained dominance. Sometimes a single season burns so bright it leaves a mark forever. Because the Tennessee Titans' very first season under their new name turned into one of the most unforgettable campaigns in NFL history. They went 13-3 in the regular season, never lost a single game at their brand new Adelphia Coliseum, and became just the 7th wildcard team ever to reach the Super Bowl. Steve McNair set the tone with his trademark toughness, playing through chest and back injuries while accounting for 21 total touchdowns. Eddie George powered the offense with 1,304 rushing yards and 9 scores, and behind them was a rookie who completely changed the defense, Javon Curse. Nicknamed the Freak, Curse exploded for 14.5 sacks, set an NFL rookie record with 8 forced fumbles, and won Defensive Rookie of the Year while finishing 2nd in Defensive Player of the Year voting. In the wild card game against Buffalo, they pulled off one of the most iconic plays in NFL history, the Music City Miracle, a 75-yard kickoff return touchdown that stunned the Bills in the final second.
That looked like a forward pass.
Dyson's down the sideline. Dyson's going to go all the way.
They carried that momentum into Indianapolis, where George ran for a franchise playoff record 162 yards to outduel Peyton Manning's 13-3 Colts.
Eddie George, room to run, up the middle, midfield, and there he goes!
Then came the AFC Championship, where Tennessee did what no one else could all year, beat the 14-2 Jacksonville Jaguars again. The Titans were the only team to defeat Jacksonville in 1999, and they did it 3 times, including a 33-14 rout to punch their ticket to the Super Bowl. That set up a clash with the St. Louis Rams' greatest show on turf.
They're celebrating right now. Look at them. Go win the game!
With under 2 minutes to play, McNair engineered a desperate 87-yard drive, escaping sacks and delivering a 16-yard strike to keep Tennessee alive. With 6 seconds left, the season came down to one final throw, 1 yard short. It's a finish forever etched in NFL history as the tackle. 1 yard defined Tennessee's fate.
He came up 1 yard short.
And 2 years later, Washington defined what it meant to leave nothing to chance. Because Washington in 1991 was head coach Joe Gibbs at the height of his powers, crafting one of the most complete rosters in NFL history. They finished 14-2, and those 2 losses came by a combined 5 points. Washington opened the season 11-0 and outscored opponents by 261 points across the year, 6th best in league history at the time. They scored 485 points, more than double what they allowed. Their average margin of victory was nearly 17 points per game, putting them in the same statistical stratosphere as the '85 Bears and '07 Patriots. Quarterback Mark Rippon had the best season of his career, leading the NFC in passing yards with 3,564. His 28 touchdowns included bombs to the posse, Art Monk, Gary Clark, and Ricky Sanders, 2 of whom went for over 1,000 yards. Ernest Biner added over 1,000 rushing yards behind the Hogs, an offensive line that remains one of the most dominant and iconic in NFL history. And the defense was every bit as lethal, with Darrell Green locking down the secondary and Charles Mann, Fred Stokes, and Wilbur Marshall attacking up front. Washington finished second in both points and yards allowed. And the postseason, pure destruction. They beat Atlanta 24-7, demolished Detroit 41-10, and in the Super Bowl, they forced 5 turnovers against the high-powered Buffalo Bills. Jim Kelly threw 4 picks, and league MVP Thurman Thomas was held to just 13 rushing yards. The final was 37-24, but the game wasn't even that close. Rippon threw for 292 yards and 2 scores to take MVP honors, while Joe Gibbs won his 3rd Lombardi with his 3rd different quarterback, something no coach has ever done. Statistics site Football Outsiders ranks the 1991 Redskins as the best team they have measured from 1986 to the present. The game has evolved. The rules, the speed, the style of play, but greatness, that always stands out. If you enjoyed this video, stick with Blitz, subscribe, and check out some of our other content right here.